Hey, good morning. I want to share with you a message today that I've titled Treating Toxic People. Now, some of you may not have anyone toxic in your life, and if that's the case, congratulations. The rest of us do. That's got to be incredible for you. So, congratulations, you can skip this message. For the rest of us, though, we are going to look at a couple passages basically out of Luke 22, John 21, and then a couple places in Matthew. To get the full story, I like to look at all the gospel writers because they each have something different to add about their interactions with Jesus. And so really what I'm basing this off of is the difference between Jesus's dealings with Peter and Jesus's dealings with Judas. And I came across a tweet this past week, or I guess it was week before last, that was posted by Nat's Barbecue, but it actually originated on Pinterest in 2015. So I'm not sure who actually said this, but I thought this was powerful, and I'm just going to read it for you. It says, discernment means being able to tell your Judas from your Peter. Peter had a bad day. Judas had a bad heart. Peter you restore. Judas you release. That's powerful. I'm going to read it again, just in case you missed it. Discernment means being able to tell your Judas from your Peter. Peter had a bad day. Judas had a bad heart. Peter you restore. Judas you release. Okay, so if we want to go back and look specifically at the different characters of Peter and Judas, and we're kind of comparing them side by side, we can say they had some things in common in that one thing, they walked with Jesus the entire 3 years of his ministry. They each had the same amount of experience with Jesus. They walked with him, they talked with him, they watched his miracles. They literally heard the words out of Jesus's mouth as he taught, as he preached the Sermon on the Mount, all those incredible things that we read about. These men were present. They were present in that space with Jesus. Another thing that we can think about is that they were both trusted members of his inner circle. I'm not talking about the inner, I'm talking about the disciple. Remember, he called 12. These men were of those 12. So, and in fact, John tells us in John chapter 12, verse 6, that Judas had hold of the money bag, which means he was one of the most trusted disciples because he was like the CFO. He was the one that was holding all the money because Jesus didn't have any belongings. He didn't have any sort of stocks in anything. His ministry was supported by donations. And that's in several places in scripture where we see women and men and families donating so that Jesus continued to go around and do his itinerant preaching, basically. And so Judas was in charge of the money, which means that he was not some guy that you're like, here, hold this. No, Judas is a trusted member of the disciples. He's responsible for the money. I don't know about you. I don't have my wallet to somebody I don't know like that. Not that you'd get very far if I gave you my wallet, but still. Jesus put a lot of trust in him, gave him the opportunity to do whatever he would. Peter was one of the trusted inner circle. You see, when Jesus goes off, and has some kind of special moments with a couple of the disciples, he's in that crew. Now, when you're just comparing the two, Peter is rough. He is like, I don't know, I don't want to call him a redneck, but like comparatively now, that's kind of what comes to my mind. He was a guy who was rough around the edges. He was a fisherman. He always put his foot in his mouth. I'm not even going to list the places in scripture where Peter says something stupid and Jesus has to rebuke him, because that's so many. And we relate a lot to Peter because we too have said stupid things. Judas, we don't hear a lot of. He's really he's just a solid guy. He's just a solid, dependable guy the entire time, except for just a few places where a couple of the gospel writers let us know what's going on. So some notable things about Peter, probably his biggest failure moment recorded for us in scripture when, Jesus is trying to explain to the disciples in Luke chapter 22 that, listen, I'm fixing to go. I have to accomplish the Father's will. You're going to be left, and these are some things you need to do. You need to understand. But some of you are going to betray me. And Peter says, what? Never. I will never betray you. Jesus, I'm ready to die for you. Let's go. Let's get to it. Let's go. I'm ready right now, today. You want to take somebody, your enemy, my enemy. Let's do this. And we look at the circumstances of what happened after that, and we think, Peter, good grief, you're such a loser, because you end up denying Christ 3 times, just like Jesus told you were going to do. And Jesus in that moment rebukes him and says, Peter, you're not quite as solid as you think you are. You're kind of arrogant about this. So you're going to need to take a step back because you are going to deny me. And Peter says, no, never, 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 never. And us having the end of the story, we know what happens. But think about what happens right after this. Jesus goes into the Garden of Gethsemane to pray before his hour has come. And Jesus says, you guys watch him pray, and then Judas comes and does his thing. And what does Peter do? In verse 56 through 62, we see the confrontation that Judas's crew comes and they say, we're looking for Jesus. And Peter says, no, not today. Swings his sword, and Luke doesn't tell us that it's Peter that does it, but John's gospel does. It rats him out totally. He cuts off one of the priests, the little servant guys, he cuts off his ear. So first of all, he's probably on a bad aim, but whatever, he tried. So why I'm saying that is Peter was serious about being ready to die with Christ. He literally was. Except after that time, Jesus rebukes him, in fact, and says, listen, I need you guys to let this happen. This is the Father's will. I need to go and do, this is all part of the plan, basically. And so Peter backs off in that moment, and then he says, as he's approached, he follows where they take Jesus. And you can read all this in the Gospels. Please do. I'm kind of, just for the sake of time, not reading all the verses, but please go back and read these passages in Luke 22 and in John and in Matthew especially. But he gets to the scene of where Jesus is being questioned unfairly and against the law, basically. And he says, someone recognizes him and says, hey, aren't you with that Jesus guy who's in there? Don't you know him, right? I've seen you with him. And Peter gets in his head and he starts thinking about it too much, which familiar. And he says, no, I'm not. What? That's crazy. I don't know him like that. And again, a second time, and again, a third time. And at that third time, exactly what Jesus said was going to happen. The rooster crowed, and Peter realized what he had done. And he goes out and he weeps bitterly because he understands that he has betrayed Christ, just like Jesus said it was going to happen. Now, so that happens with Peter. Now let's look over at Judas. Now, John tells us in chapter 12, verse 6, what I referenced earlier, that Judas was the money keeper. But he also says that he was a thief. Judas had been, siphoning off money from the ministry. Who knows how long? Could have been the entire time. Could have been a few days. Could have been a few weeks. We're not specifically told. But basically it says here, he was a thief having charge of the money bag that he used to help himself, whatever was put in it. Judas was a thief. Jesus put a thief in charge of the money. Interesting choice. Then if we go back in John 6:70, he forewarns them that, listen, of you guys, somebody's going to betray me. There is a devil in the midst. I don't know if you look in your friend group as if you got a devil in the midst, but maybe you do. Then in John 13:26, Jesus tells the group, or at least he tells Peter, because he's saying, listen, one of y'all's fitting to betray me. And Peter says, no, it's not me. And all of them start fighting over it. And then they start fighting over who's the greatest, which is totally like something we would do. But he tells Peter, the guy who I hand the bread to is the betrayer. Judas takes the bread. I don't know if it was just so unbelievable to them that Judas would be the guy out of all of these, just regular dopey guys who were obviously committed, but failures just like us. I don't know if it was just so unbelievable or if they just didn't grasp what was going to happen. What's interesting to me is that Jesus calls out his betrayer, but he calls out Judas and not Peter publicly, which is interesting. I mean, he tells Peter he's going to betray him too, but that was kind of a one-on-one situation from what I gather. But anyway, so what's the end result of both of these things? So Judas, we know, he sits at the Last Supper with Jesus, and Jesus basically, hands him bread and says, you know what, buddy? Do what you're going to do. Judas gets up, excuses himself, and he goes to the chief priest, and he basically does a setup. He arranges to set up Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And so the end result for Judas, we know in Matthew chapter 27, if we're looking at verses 4 and 5, when Jesus was condemned to die, he was overwhelmed and he tried to take the money back. In Matthew 27, he tries to take the money back and says, I am responsible for setting up an innocent man, because what they were accusing him of was not worthy of death and also not true. So, whichever. And he says, I have done the wrong thing. And he tries to give it back. And they literally throw it at him and say, not our problem. That's my loose paraphrase. That's on you, boo. That's not our deal. We already got what we wanted. They don't care. They don't even care about the money. They got what they wanted because they were trying to take out Jesus for political power. Interesting. You read between the lines there. Anyway, Judas goes out and he dies by suicide. And they called the place the Field of Blood. It was eventually named the Potter's Field. And we know that at that point, Jesus had released Judas. Now, what happens the end result with Peter? Peter denies him, but Peter gets restored. So in John chapter 21, it's a beautiful passage if you want to go over and read that. Peter's out fishing because he doesn't know what else to do. Jesus shows up, resurrected Jesus shows up and has this whole exchange with him where he helps him fish, and he shows up on the shore and cooks him breakfast and says to him, Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you. Oh, you're hurting my heart so bad. Yes, I love you. This is tearing me apart. Jesus, yes, I love you. And 3 times the same number that Peter denied Christ was the exact same number that Jesus got to hear him affirm his love for him. And Jesus gives him instruction from that moment and says, feed my sheep. Basically entrusting the care of the disciples, the people. We won't want to call it a church yet because they hadn't really even formed the church. They were called the Way. Entrusting the care of the people that were choosing to follow Jesus into Peter and the disciples' hands. And so Jesus restored Peter, but released Judas. So I'm going to read that tweet again, and let's see if we can just hash out some just practical application. Discernment means being able to tell your Judas from your Peter. Peter had a bad day. Judas had a bad heart. Peter, you restore. Judas, you release. Now, practical application. We all have both Peters and Judases in our lives. We have people that we have loved and trusted. It might be people we are in relationship with. It might be people that are our family members. It might be people that we co-parent with. Whatever your situation, we all have people that are difficult. And we all have people that are toxic. How do we deal with those according to how Jesus dealt with people? Because, I can pull out a lot of different scriptures, but I really don't want to twist something into saying it doesn't, the Bible says something it doesn't say. In context, what I'm walking away from this the way that Jesus dealt with both of these men was that he allowed them to be who they were going to be. He gave them opportunity. And of course, Jesus had the advantage that we don't have, which is Jesus knew their hearts, right? I mean, he saw through it. He saw the motives. He saw the intentions. And we don't get to see people's motives and intentions. And oftentimes we judge those or misjudge those. And so we really have to pray that God gives us the discernment to understand who people truly are. Not who they say they are, but who they truly are and what they truly desire. So we have to listen to people's words, and we have to watch their actions. Those are the ways that we're going to know what people are up to. Listen, but sometimes people say a bunch of stuff they don't mean, so we watch, because we always do what we believe. Not what we say we believe, but what we actually believe. So, 4 things that I am seeing from this, the way Jesus handled these 2 men. Number 1, believe people's actions. Even in prison, I think I err on the side of mercy, because I never know. I mean, I don't want to judge people based on their worst day, right? I mean, nobody wants to be judged on their worst mistake. So I want to give people the opportunity, even after failure. And so if I err on the side of mercy, then that's on me. I don't mind to take it for that. And I'm really sorry about the dogs barking, but I cannot control that right now. So I want to err on the side of mercy and on grace. But there is a point to which someone's behavior says to you, I am not interested in change. At that point, as Maya Angelou said, when people show you who they are, believe them. When someone's behavior says, I'm not going to change, I'm not interested in your well-being, I'm not interested in your family's well-being, I'm not interested in whatever your thing is, then we need to believe that. Stop expecting people to be something that they're not, or something that they're not even capable of being. And that's so hard for us, because especially for someone like me, I think I'm an optimist, and I don't even know if I choose, I see the best in people, which is both a blessing and a curse, because sometimes people are not ready for those kind of expectations yet. It doesn't mean they'll never be there, but it does mean that we have to scale back our expectations. So believe people's actions. When someone says something but it's not followed up by their actions, then believe what they do over what they say every single time. So that's number 1, believe people's actions. Number 2, set boundaries. Just because Jesus was kind, just because Jesus is gracious and merciful, does not mean that you and I are not to be people that have boundaries. Because for your own emotional, spiritual, mental well-being, there are people that are so sick, and I'm talking about in their own mental anguish, that they can't do anything but hurt you. And it's not even if they intend to do it, if they don't intend to do it. They're so messed up, so jacked up emotionally themselves, whether you're dealing with a narcissist or you're dealing with a personality disorder, whatever you're dealing with, they can only see themselves and how things revolve around them in a crazy way. That's not healthy for you. And that's when you have to set boundaries. I'm not saying you have to quit talking to somebody, whatever. Maybe you do. But whatever your boundary is, make sure that it's something that you can hold and keep, because people will treat you how you allow them to treat you. And so if you set a boundary with someone, then you need to hold that boundary, and hold it knowing that Jesus had boundaries too. Peter was saying all kinds of crazy stuff, and Jesus went, no, that's not going to happen. So Jesus had boundaries. You can have boundaries. It is healthy. It is normal. It is good for you to have boundaries, especially when you're dealing with somebody so toxic. So believe people's actions. Set your boundaries. Number 3, focus on the bigger picture. I have learned in dealing with people that the stated problem is rarely the actual problem. A lot of times, what the perceived issue is really not the heart of the issue. And so if you can, try to view things not, even though it may be a personal attack at you, try to not take it personally and try to look at, okay, what's the bigger picture? What might this person be feeling? Where is this coming from? Trying to understand basically what the issue truly, truly is so that you can get to the bottom of it, because we can't heal what we don't feel. So focus on the bigger picture. A lot of times we can get wrapped up in little nya stuff that does not make any sense and does not matter to anyone. I mean, honestly, in the big picture, in the long run, this stuff doesn't matter. So why are we wasting our time over it? I don't have time to play games. I am 40 years old. I got 5 kids. I got a whole job career thing going on. I got all this stuff. I do not have time for games. So don't come at me sideways with some kind of cuckoo mess, because we're raising kids over here. We're raising kids, having a life, doing us. And setting, again, going back to that, setting on the boundaries, set them, stay. Don't go backwards on that. And then the fourth thing is you release them into God's care. That doesn't mean we kill them or anything like that, okay? Nobody take that from this message and then blame me. No, we're release them. And that doesn't mean that you have to forget everything that's ever happened from that person. Obviously, I think we're called to forgive. A lot of times our forgiveness is required even when they don't apologize. Because a lot of us that really are owed some apologies aren't ever going to get them. And if my forgiveness depends on your apology, I'm going to be straight up out of luck. So to me, I find it better to work on my anger, my issues with the person, and do the forgiving before I'm ever apologize to, if I ever get an apology. So just be aware that you may not get an apology. And even if you don't, that's okay. Forgiveness is for you. It's for our hearts. It's for our peace of mind, not for them. Some folks, you're going to have to, good luck. And I don't think that's unbiblical, because basically that's what happened to Judas. Jesus allowed him to walk with him, talk with him, showed him the miracles, taught him incredible things. He watched everything. And at the end of the day, Judas chose what he chose, man. And at that Last Supper, Jesus said, go do what you're going to do. You're in God's hands. And whatever God chooses to do with you, that's his business. It's not my business. I don't think Jesus was, I don't know if the word angry is right, but I don't think Jesus was really even mad about it. He knew what was going to happen. You and I, we may not know the outcome, obviously. We don't have that kind of special knowledge, but we do know that God is faithful to us and to others, and that when people are ready to change, they change. It's not on us to change them. You can't change anybody. I can't change anybody. And the only person at the end of the day that I am accountable for is me. So, if you're dealing with somebody toxic in your life, believe their actions, not their words. They may say, I want to help. I want to do this. I want to be involved. I want to fix things. I want to work together. Okay, great. Watch what they do. Watch what they do. Then set boundaries. Okay, this is acceptable. This is not. Be practical. I can't tell you what those boundaries are because I don't know your situation. Be practical. But if it takes your peace, if it steals your peace, it's too much. It's too much. We don't have time for drama. We got other stuff to do. Third thing, focus on the bigger picture. Try to see past the small issue that is stated to the actual issue of what's probably really going on. And it probably involves a lot of fear. It probably involves a lot of insecurity, because that's what we all do. That's what we all do. We react out of our own fear and insecurity. Try not to take it so personally. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, but again, don't take it super personal. And then at some point, whether releasing them means never speaking to them again, or whether releasing them just means that you don't harbor the ill will and the bad intentions, whatever that looks like for you, release them into God's care, knowing that he is a faithful judge, that ultimately, if your name needs to be defended, he'll defend it. That really, at the end of the day, his opinion of you is all that matters. And so I don't know how this lesson specifically applies to you other than we all got Peters and we all got Judases. We've all been a Peter, and heck, some of us might be a Judas from time to time. But maybe this would be a good time to evaluate these passages in the Gospels and see if maybe we could do a little work to not be a Judas. And maybe some of us are kind of at the Peter stage where we've screwed up, but we really, really want to be back doing what we're supposed to do, following Jesus. Man, there's no better day than today. So with all this said, and how we treat our toxic people, know that you are loved, you're worthy, and blessings on you and yours.